Lauren Regan. I'm the attorney and executive director of the Civil Liberties Defense Center, and welcome to the first session of Occupation Education Community Organizer Training Series. The goal or the purpose of this training series is to assist community organizers and activists in coming up with a set of goals, and the end result will hopefully be a strategic campaign plan for not only Occupy Eugene, but if you're a part of another group, you're of course welcome to be here and to use this information for those purposes. In addition to the folks that are here live in the Occupy 5 headquarters, we have a bunch of people who are going to be watching this via live stream and YouTube as well. And they are going to be able to ask questions live via the live stream, so we'll have their participation as well. So we handed around syllabuses or syllabi. This is located on the Occupy Eugene Media Occupation Education website. On that website are not only all the different sessions, but as supplemental materials become available for each session, you'll find them located there so you can download them yourself, read them over in advance if you want, print them out if you'd like, etc., etc. And the syllabi might change a little bit throughout the course of the next couple of months, so check back. Especially for the supplemental material. Our primary contact person for this entire series is Mary. Her email is located on the syllabi. If you have any questions or concerns or suggestions, or if you want to get on the Occupation Education listserv for regular updates, just email her at Mary B, MARIB.Eugene@gmail.com, and we can get you any information that you need.
So anyone that did not get an email today from me, actually two because I corrected the Saturday to the Sunday date, anyone that did not get an email from me today, please sign this before you leave.
If you don't know, just sign it.
Right. If you don't know, just sign it, yeah.
So these sessions are designed to build upon each other, but you're not required to come to every single one in order to participate in them. The sessions, like I mentioned, will be live streamed. They are going to be available on YouTube and CTV, our local cable TV station, as well as hard DVDs are going to be available of all of the different sessions. So if you missed one, feel free to catch up by watching them in the interim. And there may be sessions that you might feel are not applicable to your skill set, and you're welcome to pass on those. The first thing I wanted to do is just kind of go through the syllabus really quickly before we dive into some of the fundamentals of community organizing, which is the topic for tonight. Tonight's sort of the warm-up session. Get everybody oriented and kind of wrap our heads around about what we are taking on throughout this series. Now, this Sunday, March 18th, will probably be one of the more important sessions that we're going to have. Dr. Gordon Lafer, who is a pretty famous labor union organizer and educator, is going to come in all day long from 10 to 5 to begin our work on strategic campaign planning. And if you look on the syllabus, I've listed off some of the things that we intend to cover in that session. What kind of goals should the movement have? And of course, for us sitting in this room, we're going to be focusing on Occupy Eugene as our guinea pig, as our test example. But like I said, this could apply to any movement or any organization you're a part of. And that will basically be focusing on what are the things that we want to accomplish in the next 6 months. In 2012, what do we want to get done? And that's what we're going to be trying to focus on. And in order to, the next step is, given those goals that we decide, how many people do we need to achieve them? Because if we don't have enough people, we're going to fail in reaching that goal. And so those two things are really tied together. How do we increase the number of people involved, which is always an issue for all movements. What criteria do we use to evaluate how we're reaching those goals? Because obviously it's great to set goals, but if we're not measuring our success, then we're not going to be going very far with those. How can we possibly think about seriously winning some of these goals with the interests that are against us? You know, large corporations, governments that are fairly stuck in their ways, you know, the war on terrorism and all these other things that are hindrances to our work. And then finally, how do you make a concrete, serious plan for winning some of those goals within the next 6 months? And that will be the last part of that session. So don't miss that. The other reason that that's an important one is this is going to kind of lay out a lot of our homework assignments for the next couple of months. The plan is, you know, after we leave that Sunday session, then we're going to start looking in depth in some of the parts we need to examine to be able to really put that plan together. So we're going to have a session on using work plans and how to do planning for events and campaigns and things like that, and how to be accountable to committees and ourselves in getting that work done. How do we report back and forth to each other? You know, how do we keep track of the things we said we were going to do and make sure that they actually get done? The next section is how to use things like crabgrass and social networking, you know, getting people a little more up to speed on some of the computer skills that we're all being kind of forced to learn all of a sudden, that will hopefully make our communications more effective and enable us to work collaboratively in an easier framework. Then we're going to dive in, we're going to have Bob Buckle, who is also a very well-known union organizer and academic and researcher. He's going to come in and talk to us about how to build coalitions and membership. You know, how do we bring in other groups, other allies to assist us in the work we want to do, and how do we build Occupy volunteers and membership on our own. And April 11th, we're kind of having a rock star come down from Portland who's going to give us a 2-hour training on how to plan action. And, you know, basically how to plan a protest, how to plan a rally, how to plan a demonstration, all of those things, all of the basic components, and how to work with others and pulling those things off as targeted and distinctly and effectively as possible. Then April 18th, we're going to have a Political Economics 101. You know, all this complicated vocabulary you read about in the paper. We're going to have a couple people come in and just kind of explain to us what this language means, what these terms mean, and how we can use it in our own rhetoric and in advocating for a lot of the issues that we're working on. After that, right now we're hoping to bring Max Rameau into town. Max is kind of a famous activist right now. He wrote a book called Take Back the Land and has been really involved in a lot of liberating vacant buildings and foreclosed homes and kind of basically squatting them. And so he's going to be one of our trainers on April 25th for a session on consumer debt and foreclosure activism. And we chose those two as kind of specific topical forums to dive into because it's more likely than not that those issues are going to be at least one of the goals of Occupy Eugene, you know, we assumed in the end campaign plan. And then after that, we're going to go back to strategic campaign planning again. Dr. Lafer is going to come back in for a 2-hour session with the hope that by this point, we're ready to actually put a campaign plan on paper. And like I mentioned, you know, the end result is hopefully that we are going to take this document that we're going to create in these sessions and bring them to the General Assembly and have them affirmed as, you know, the Occupy Eugene campaign plan for 2012. After that session, we're going to dive into how to use media and outreach. How do we get our message out to allies as well as mainstream media? The next session is going to be building and using organizational power, which basically means, how do we use politicians, how do we meet with politicians or corporate bigwigs and try to sway them to our side of the issues, or at least establish some form of working relationship that might assist us in our campaign work. And then finally, the last session that's scheduled right now, way out in May 23rd, is basically how to prevent burnout. Now that we've learned all these great skills and you're going to be a great organizer, we don't want you to burn out. And so the last session will be, how to keep yourself well, and fight the man and, still be able to smile in the morning. So that's the syllabus. Our hope is that by the end of this session, everybody in this room will be a capable organizer, able to, lead campaigns and, more people rowing the boat, so to speak. And once these sessions are over, we have an idea for a next round of sessions that will be bringing in various movement leaders to talk about what worked, what didn't work, tactics, pros and cons, things of that nature. We've got, everything from Black Panthers to Quakers lined up to come in and share their personal experiences and lifetimes of activism with us, and we'll start those at the end of May. And hopefully by then it will be nice and we'll be outside and it'll be lovely. Okay, so like I mentioned, tonight's session is basically kind of to give you some nuts and bolts, some vocabulary about community organizing. And as I kind of mentioned, my area of expertise is as a lawyer, but since I was about 11 years old, I've been an activist as well, and primarily animal rights and environmental activism, but I have represented mosques who are having grand jury documents requested. I represent Native American groups that are trying to save sacred sites from logging operations. I've represented all sorts of racial minorities being targeted by police and government harassment, non-documented people. So I have my hands in a multitude of different movements, choicefully, because that's what I wanted to do with my life, and that's what I wanted to do with my law degree. But I'm not necessarily a professor, and I am definitely not an expert in community organizing, though I've been doing it for about 20-something years now. So with that caveat, so a few of the things we're going to talk about tonight are a couple of different models of community organizing. What is community organizing in general? What kind of skills are needed to do that type of work? The issues that activists face confronting social problems. We'll briefly talk about theories of community organizing, though that could be, a year-long discussion in and of itself. What's been tried in the past, what's worked, what's failed, and what choices we have, and the tough decisions that need to be made. So, community organizing is definitely not easy. Most of us are volunteers, and we're, entering into this as almost like a hobby, but community organizing involves long-term planning, months of meetings, discussions, and strategy sessions, and hard work out in the communities that you're working in. Organizers need management skills, they need financial skills, they need to be able to hold meetings, they need to be able to work with the media. And that's a big range of skills to be attempting to acquire. Part of the reason why we're going to spend the next couple of months trying to put those skills together. So why would someone want to become a community organizer? I think that is a question that I will put to you all. Why are you here, or why do you want to be a community organizer right now? Make the world a better place, definitely. Most people these days are angry about some social justice issue that they feel needs to be addressed. Many of us see a lot of injustice in society, or the failure of government to do what we think it should be doing, and are outraged. And the example I often give is, Katrina, which is like a classic example of, what ignited a lot of people to the view that there was something in inherently wrong with our government. Most of us believe in the basic principles of equality and social justice and freedom, and most of us don't like to see people exploited. And those are often reasons that people will become community organizers. So, what words come to mind when thinking of the term community organizing? What is involved in being a community organizer? Anyone?
Organize.
That's a good one.
Lots of meetings.
Lots of meetings. Yes.
Demonstrations. I think our government is failing, and we need to replace it.
Okay. All right.
Community outreach.
Community outreach. Yeah. Planning, definitely.
Developing effective strategies.
Yes. Developing effective strategies. All of those things that are.
Reaching words.
Yeah. Yeah.
Networking potential allies.
Networking potential allies, key as well. Good. So for tonight's focus, I've kind of written up 5 terms up on the board that are sort of the classic terms that if you ever went to an organizing class, they're going to teach you. The first one is mobilizing, and that basically has to do with mobilizing people to work together to solve a shared problem. You go into a community that's dealing with environmental pollution, and you try to get that neighborhood to band together to address their own problems. That's mobilizing. It includes learning that individual problems have social causes. That a lot of people kind of think that somehow certain groups of people are predestined to a certain outcome. That there's nothing they can do about their plight. And mobilizing is one tactic that we use to try to educate people that they have the power to change their own surroundings. The next word is agency, and in the concept of community organizing, we're talking about capacity for human beings to make choices and to impose those choices on the world. It's normally compared with like natural forces, which involve some kind of unthinking deterministic process. If you are born in sub-Saharan Africa, where drought and famine are your daily situation, that could be a type of natural force that you have to deal with versus the kind that you can actually elect and make changes for. Human agency entails the claim that humans do in fact make decisions and then enact them on the world rather than the other way around. And this belief in agency, that belief is what basically empowers individuals to have the capacity to change, and that collectively fighting back is the way to do that. One person on their own can maybe make a ripple, but 100 people together can cause a wave. The next term is development, and this basically means empowering individuals to learn skills and gain the confidence to try new approaches. This process is where you try to increase a community's capacity to put pressure on governments or businesses to obtain needed services or to build and grow social services. This is kind of keenly related to Occupy. This is where we bring in unhoused people, housed people, all sorts of different groups and individuals, and we basically are trying to teach them how to advocate to politicians and businesses to take better care of those that are least able to care for themselves. And the idea is that we will all gain confidence and skills to solve those problems together. Finally, empowerment, empowering people, basically, both individually and collectively, to bring about change. But not only just to bring about change, but to bring it about democratically. We don't want to be holding people at gunpoint, telling them that they need to feed the homeless. We want it to be a change within themselves. Solving problems is important, but even more important, people need to learn to solve their own problems. And being a good community organizer is, you don't want to dictate the plan to others. You want them to be part of that plan and to believe that they actually came up with it. John?
I think you skipped.
Sorry?
I think you skipped who you went from.
Oh, okay, community, right, okay, sorry. Yeah, I have them out of order, sorry. So community, what I mean by that term is this goes beyond the geography, and this goes beyond just calling it a neighborhood. What we're talking about with community is the bonds between people. We call this sometimes social capital, that psychological and material linkage that enables people to actually help each other. And this is important for all organizers, whether you're working rurally or in an urban setting, and especially for those who work with a variety of ethnic or cultural or racial communities, communities that sometimes are in competition to have their voices heard, to work with all voices so that we can all have a say in what's going on. And so community organizing is a search for social power for people and communities. It's the antidote to the sense of helplessness people feel as they confront shared problems. It involves bringing people together to combat those shared problems, and it increases people's say about the decisions that affect their lives. So with that being said, why don't people fight back? When there's an injustice in your community, why don't people who experience problems themselves, why don't they fight back? Anybody have any thoughts on that?
TV.
Tired, filthy, got kids, they don't want to lose, they feel powerless.
And they've been convinced that that's the way the world works, and that's the way it's supposed to be.
Don't see another way.
Yeah.
Lack of time and energy after coming home from work.
Yes, yes. Self-blame, often they'll blame themselves for not getting a better education, or, battered women blaming themselves somehow, that's a big theme. I think somebody mentioned fear, like fear of retaliation, or, fear of being isolated from their neighbors or their friends, or, they don't know how. Yeah.
Among social activists, fear of being seen as capitalistic when it comes to economic organizing and activism.
Okay. Yes. Okay, so oftentimes, another reason that people are not more actively engaged in their communities is because they really don't know how, and I've heard this even within our Occupy group that, especially new people, they don't know how to organize a protest, or they don't know how to persuade others to join them, or how to pressure a politician. And we certainly don't teach any of these skills in school any longer. So, we also have issues like financial and social dependency. People can feel helpless because they're dependent on that chemical company that is actually polluting their environment because they need a job. We often see things like that happening in our local communities as well. So the next term that I kind of want to throw out to you, and I will preface it by saying I hate using words like this, but there's a term called intellectual hegemony, or some people pronounce it hegemony. Yeah. I don't like using fancy words like that, but just so that there's this concept that, people don't want to protest, or they fail to protest because they have been taught to accept the idea that those in authority are right, and that questioning authority is wrong. That government or industry or religious leaders would never do anything to harm us or to create social problems. And as someone who sues the police and the government for a living, I can't tell you how many times jurors, have told me that, despite videotape of someone being brutalized by a cop, that the cop couldn't have done anything wrong because they're there to protect and serve us. And the fear that those people have is that by actually having to acknowledge that a police officer could do this type of thing in rare circumstances, that somehow they are unsafe. That their entire universe is on shaky ground because that one pillar, has been weakened in some way. And this is an incredibly important concept for community organizers to recognize, that it's not necessarily that people don't believe what you're saying, but what you're asking them to believe hurts the moral fiber that they have built up over all of these years in order to feel safe in a pretty unsafe world. And so, people in power, people with wealth or political influence, actually shape the ideas with which the rest of us are supposed to be interpreting the world. Like, for instance, hegemony, I always want to say it the other way around. Hegemony is basically an exercise of subtle domination over society. And what I mean by that is it's the understanding that those in power shape what is appropriate behavior and what is not. And for those of you that are historians, there is a prominent social theorist named Gramsci, and he was actually an Italian communist thinker and political leader, and he's kind of most tied to this term, intellectual hegemony. And he actually spent the last 11 years of his life in Mussolini's prisons and wrote this book that a lot of this is based on, and he developed his critique of culture actually using Marxist theory. And so some of this comes from there. And to him, hegemony refers to a process of moral and intellectual leadership through which dominated or subordinated classes. The interesting thing about this term is that the masses, us, we the people, actually consent to our own domination by these ruling classes, by business or government or religious leaders. We're not being simply forced or coerced into accepting this position, but we actually are raised with the idea that this is true and we should all believe it. And Gramsci actually assumed that no regime, regardless of how authoritarian it might be, could sustain itself primarily through organized state power or armed force, that they actually had to get everybody to believe in this stuff because there aren't enough guns in the world to control the masses otherwise. And so in the long run, they had to have popular support and legitimacy in order to maintain stability. And this permeates throughout society and is an entire system of values, attitudes, beliefs, and morality that has the effect of supporting the status quo. That status quo that we are directly attacking, especially in Occupy work. And so this has become, a highly defined organizing principle that we are going to need to confront and find ways to work around. When we talk about framing and, coming up with messaging and talking points, we'll come back once again to these terms. So to give you a few examples of this, government taxes. Everybody pays taxes, even though most of us don't support wars, because that's how society works. You just pay it. Even though we know that our money is going to support wars and that rich people are getting huge tax breaks, we still pay 1/3 of our salaries every year towards that. No ifs, ands, or buts, except for rare exceptions. Prisons. We've kind of come to accept that bad people go to prisons and that's the only alternative that we have, and that somehow that system works in the face of overwhelming evidence that it's not working. And terrorism. We've kind of come to think that it's common sense to put video cameras in every street corner and spy on your neighbor and whatnot, because Of course the FBI needs to infiltrate peace groups and vegan potlucks. All the things. So, it literally becomes common sense. A lot of these things, many people, if you ask them, they would say, well, that's common sense, that people pay taxes and prisons are where bad people go. So it comes to be the natural order of things, which is why it's so hard to break down those barriers when you're advocating for social change. But how do we do it? How does that happen? So we have to understand that there's a subtle but pervasive form of ideological control and manipulation and consent going on in our society today, and that this serves to perpetuate all repressive structures that we have in society today. And Gramsci argued that the way society is controlled and manipulated is a direct consequence of the practice of a false consciousness and the creation of values and life choices that are to be followed. So, for instance, things like, workers are taught to believe that corporations have the right to do what they want with their business, regardless of what happens to their employees, right? We've all heard that, and some of us probably believed it at some point in their lives. Businesses have the right to move to another country, because, of course, private property is sacred, right? We can't challenge the right to private property. Minorities have been told to wait on civil liberties issues, not to push too fast. Students are taught that capitalism is the natural order of things, and that dominating nature, exploiting our natural resources is the natural order of things. And in some places, wives are taught that they should always let their husbands make the decisions regardless of the consequences. All of those, are examples of this type of subtle repression. And of course, citizens are told to believe their governments when they provide justifications for war, crime, cutting social programs, et cetera, et cetera. So we see this within social movements, within our own leadership as well. For instance, labor unions, accept pay in exchange for removing the demand for internationalization. Or environmentalists may become pacified by incentives or having one of their own get an administrative cabinet position in the government, and they will give up things. This is all kind of looked at in terms of what's called framing. It's called imposed framing, where people accept the idea that power and legitimacy should not be opposed. But we, as community organizers, have to understand all of these subtle points and have to help people recognize that there are structural bases to social problems. We have to recognize that personal problems reflect pervasive economic or cultural forces. If somebody's in prison, they might say, oh, well, he did drugs, and that's how he ended up there. Well, why did he do drugs? Was he raised in a, impoverished family, had domestic violence? Was he raised with one parent or no parent? Usually everything that you see at the surface will have some underlying social cause that is actually the root problem of that. Those are the root causes, those are the social problems that we need to organize around. So what organizing does, number one, it helps us overcome the sense of powerlessness that we feel. It builds confidence. It helps inform us that the causes of social problems are rooted in the social and economic issues of this country and not personal. It's not a personal choice to be poor or homeless. That there are many, many social and economic causes that actually made that occur. That the problems are pervasive. That individuals alone can't solve them. Giving somebody Social Security disability payments are not going to get that person off the street alone. The process of helping people understand that shared problems that they face are real, and then encouraging them to join together with others to fight back. Organizing is about teaching community members the power of working together. It's not just about doing a single action that might piss off 90% of the community. Community organizing is about trying to bring people together and finding common ground that you can work on, in mass form. Organizing builds on social linkages and networks that bring people together to create firm bonds for collective action versus individual action. And organizers must work with coalitions to challenge the power of governments and private interests. That saying, the more the merrier, never rings truer than when you're community organizing. I think the last term that I kind of skipped over was development. Development basically means the ongoing creation of personal and collective resources that enable people to fight back and take charge. It's the process whereby people increase their capacity to pressure government and build capacity to empower others. I think those are probably the basic vocab terms that I wanted to cover. Oh, the final one, this term agency again. There's individual agency and then there's collective agency. These terms also derived from Marxist traditions surrounding collective, working collectively or within a collective. There were, basically, the theory is that, humans should be treated as social beings organized to act in concert with each other. And this all stems from, the idea of mass movement. And so, community organizing is about building mass movement and about organizing people to be able to fight back as a group. All right, so, any questions on the basic framework? Yeah.
The name of the person whose work that you're drawing from for this
Gramsci is spelled Grandsci. Antonio Gramsci. Amsci.
Prison Notebook.
The Prison Notebook is the most famous name. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah. Or comments?
Well, the mass organizing model of Marxism historically has been very effective, but there's some question that that model is really applicable in postmodern electronic. It's not complexity theory that's different teaching about how complex systems are altered. But that's a long discussion.
Okay, I was going to say, do you want to just briefly explain what you mean by that for folks that aren't familiar with this term more loudly?
Well, the mass organizing model is sort of a linear model where you get a bunch of people together and you push society in a certain direction. But complexity theory teaches that the way complex systems change is not a linear process. That an ordered system, when an ordered system goes into a chaotic state, which we're approaching now socially, the way you emerge from that chaotic state is not through mass behavior, but through, you can think of it as, one of the terms is nucleation of order. So it happens in small and separate, it's the level of consciousness that's developed in small groups that spreads through the system in a different way than a mass organizing. That's the best I can do.
So, to say it another way, it's kind of the difference between mass groups of people versus using cells. If you've ever heard of...
Well, not this kind of Marxist cells. The GA, that, in a way, you look at, the GA is a microcosm of the new society. And the consciousness that we develop through our consensus process is a new form of energy, and then that radiates outward, but not necessarily through a mass organizing model.
So why don't you think that mass organizing could be effective for occupied movements now?
Mass organizing was suited a culture where you had limited media and you had a certain number of people who are much more highly informed than other people. But now we have so much media, we're all so intelligent, and we're all capable of doing these things that only the organizers used to do.
Okay, well, that can definitely be some discussion, in-depth discussion for another time, maybe.
Or later this.
Yeah, we might have time at the end of the session to come back to that.
Okay, then we'll work on it then.
Okay. Yeah, I kind of made it so that we should have about 20 minutes at the end for a wrap-up discussion or questions, so hopefully I can do that. Were there any other questions or comments at this point? Okay. So the next thing I kind of wanted to run through were the different types of democratic organizations that exist and what the differences are between them. You know, just kind of the assumptions here that we're making are people rarely do things alone. There are very few one-person organizing teams, unless, you know, maybe you're working with Anonymous or some underground cell. The social change takes place when people come together in community and social change organizations, that they're able to gain power as a collective, putting their individual concerns together, and that they will build the capacity to work towards solutions together. Those are the assumptions that we make in looking towards democratic organizing. And so many types of social change and community-based organizations exist. Just look around this town and you'll see a huge plethora of them. And they take on a huge variety of issues. You know, I'll never forget going to an animal rights conference and meeting a woman whose sole issue was poultry. She ran a group called United Poultry Concerns. And it was a national group dedicated to the safety of chickens, basically. So, you know, there are an enormous myriad of issues out there that people work on. And they classify these organizations based on what their mission is. And a mission statement is usually like a one-sentence statement that kind of encapsulates why the group exists and what they're there for. And so these different types of community organizations sort of frame the type of work and the type of outreach that those groups will do. So for instance, one example is social action organizations. They generally pressure governments and business through lobbying and through direct action to change laws or policies or regulations, to redirect resources to those individuals or groups that they think have a need for them, and they generally work to enhance human and civil rights issues. Then that's a social action organization, and obviously, like the word social, you know, social media is kind of key there. Then there are economic and social development organizations. They try to fix the failures of a capitalist economy. And you're going to notice that by the time we get through all of these, occupy maybe in all of these different categories, that will be a discussion that we can have at a later time too. But economic and social development organizations try to provide goods and services that are not available. So like, for instance, providing medical care on the weekends would be an example of that type of service. They try to push for humane capitalism, or a more democratic one where workers get a say on what's taking place in their lives. They provide social services that help to empower people. Examples of this are things like women's centers, community-controlled health facilities, low-income housing groups, and even neighborhood organizations like restoration groups and stuff like that. Network organizations try to coordinate the actions of other smaller groups. So, like, for instance, maybe you could view, like, Occupy Together as a type of networking organization that's purpose is to try to pull all the different occupiers together from around the country. That's a network organization. And then there are national advocacy coalitions or support organizations. They basically try to get information to the public and to decision makers. They train organizers, they lobby, they're basically advocating a particular position and trying to get other people and politicians to go along with what they want. want to be working on. Pressure organizations are another form of organization. These groups work within the conventional rules of the system. You know, they lobby, they petition, they provide political support to candidates that they think are better than others, and they try to persuade those bureaucrats and industries to adopt policies that might be better for society in their view. That is compared, pressure organizations are compared and contrasted to protest organizations. Protest organizations don't work within those usual rules. They work outside of the conventional rules. They question the legitimacy of those that are in power. They also question the legitimacy of the rules themselves. Are these laws just? And then, a classic example of this is the civil rights movement in terms of a protest organization. And there are many examples of protest organizations, and I would say that our own is probably within that category. And so there are a lot of interesting questions that come out of that framework that we have to grapple with. For instance, organizations are important for a number of reasons. They leave in place a structure. Even just having a space to congregate can be an important facet of a movement. They can take on many forms. They can be consensus-based affinity groups. They can be national. They can be community-based. They can use a business-style model. They can be anarchist-oriented. The myriad is many. But in general, they're going to coordinate actions. They are going to employ or recruit volunteers to train people and communities. They're going to communicate to those in power that people are organized and that they're here to challenge them. They're like kind of the voice of the mass behind them. And they link activists together to work towards progressive change. We hear a lot about things like progressive change or progressive social values, and basically what those terms mean, progressive social values means achieving change consistent with progressive values. You don't want to dominate other groups to get what you want. You don't want to rely on professionals or politicians to get what you want. And the power comes from the people. There's an adage, that goes back a long ways as well. An example of this are things like local student groups, where we want to have them understand the larger economic, cultural, and political systems when designing campaigns and when organizing. And to do that, we need to be able to talk about framing, tactics, and strategy. And these topics, those three words, framing, tactics, and strategy, are going to be totally independent sessions that we're going to have. Those are incredibly broad topics, but they're also just incredibly important ones, because you can't have a campaign that will be effective. You can't reach a goal without being really good at all three of those things. If you don't have a message that's well-framed, you can't develop an effective strategy. And if you don't have a good strategy, no tactic in the world is going to achieve your goal. And that's sort of how they will all work together. Yeah.
Could you repeat those three things? Was it message, strategy?
Framing, tactics, strategy. Probably in every session that we have. So the other words that I want to just kind of touch on, kind of get us ready to go, is the term democracy and social change and democracy. In my mind, that term democracy involves concepts like informed participation of a large number of people. educating a group of people about the issues and letting them come to their own decisions and their own understanding about the issue that you're working on. It involves transparency. You can't have secret groups meeting in secret places, planning secret things if you're doing democratic organizing. All members and all participants must be ensured of a way to participate in that process. And things like our General Assemblies are perfect examples of that type of transparent, participatory democracy. And community organizing is generally based on the ideals of democracy, respect for others' opinions, and full involvement of anyone who wants to participate in making those core decisions. So, when organizing and development efforts succeed, what happens? What is the outcome of a successful organizing endeavor? So what do you want to see at the end of a successful organizing effort?
Justice.
Yes, change, justice, people becoming empowered, to continue that work and to continue to be able to be activists. Communities are strengthened. I've often mentioned that, one of my primary goals for this series, regardless of whatever happens to Occupy Eugene, is that this town will now have 50 new, incredibly trained, excellent organizers to take on any issue that comes, for the rest of the time that we live here. And so strengthening communities are an incredibly important part of this. Problems are solved, hopefully, and more problems come up, and more work will need to be done, and we'll all be trained and ready to do it. Because there's really no putting yourself out of a job as a community organizer. So a couple of key points to community organizing and development. One is you want to build democratically guided organizations. And with Occupy, we're well on our way in that endeavor. The framework that's been set up that most Occupies are using are well guided in that manner. This most often revolves around a vision or an ideology. We used to have a visioning committee. I'm not sure if it still exists. Does that still exist? Okay. All right. Good. And I think we all kind of came together with some common ideology when we activated ourselves in this way. We all have beliefs about what society should look like. They may not be exactly the same for each of us, but we have some core alignments that allow us to work together on a lot of the issues that we'll be facing in the next 6 months or so. The means of achieving change, the how-to, must be consistent with the goal. So the tactics that we develop have to be consistent with the goals we set out for. And there can't be racism or sexism or any of the isms in the process of organizing. Especially if one of our goals is to create a just society, we have to always keep in mind what does that just society look like, and how are we representing that? How are we modeling that to others? And then the other kind of common belief is experts can't be brought in to help solve complex problems. They can be brought in to give you advice on complex problems, but they should not be allowed to dominate decision-making. And I always am really cognizant of this as a lawyer. Sometimes I get brought into other towns and communities to help with things. And someone told me that the definition of an expert is somebody from out of town with a briefcase. I myself often have to be really careful about people kind of just throwing their troubles, in front of me and thinking I'm going to fix them because I have a law degree. So I'm well aware of that as an example of how that sometimes can happen. And we definitely don't want that to be the case if we're going to try to be democratically organizing. So people must be empowered. And so one thing I want to kind of take a couple of minutes and kind of go around and talk about is what are your visions or your goals for organizing? as you sit here today on day one, what are your goals as an organizer? Just to kind of give you an example, things like fair distribution of wealth, or, undoing wealth disparity. It could be an example of, like, a goal that you have for being an organizer. So, anybody want to throw theirs out? Yeah.
I want to see every CEO, major banks in jail.
Every CEO of major banks in jail. All right, that's a good goal.
Mine is a little bit more short term than that, but props, I totally agree with you. I want to see Occupy Eugene narrow their focus to a few issues that we can actually sink our teeth into and, like, make some change. We feel a little scattered, like we're spread out over a lot of different issues right now, and I would like to see us narrow that focus to some major goals and see some work towards that over the spring and summer.
And do you have any particular campaign or issue that you would like to throw into the pot as one of those goals?
I've got a few of them. I think that we should be looking at what the effects of government's preferential treatment of corporate interests in our own area, like the forestry spraying that is making people sick and just continues to happen. It is continuously happening. There's a lot of this going on out on Triangle Lake and in other areas of Oregon. People are ending up with poison in them, and I think that being a local issue is something we could really get. Then we've got this coal train coming through town, possibly, if we don't stop it, and that's a huge local issue. I guess those are the two major ones I see right now.
Well, that's cool.
Well, that's really interesting, because I realize, those are really important things, and I realize that I haven't been thinking really locally, or thinking more nationally, and so I see a lot of, what inspired me about Occupy is sort of the exposing, of the corruption and the greed, and something that, that everybody can wake up to. Because they're so pervasive. But doing that through local issues is really powerful.
Well, and what would be the goal? It sounds like exposing corporations would be your tactic. And what would be your goal? What would you be trying to solve or fix in doing that?
To empower them.
Okay.
To take back democracy.
That's great. Who else? Do you have your hand in the back there? Yes.
Yeah, if you would like to help organize out of Lake Community College around the Higher One banking trip they have there with students.
How about stopping that importation?
Go up more loudly.
Yeah.
I'll have you repeat things.
Stopping the 1% from bringing all of our raw materials in the Cascadia bioregion.
Okay, so stopping corporations from raping the natural resources of Cascadia.
Stop the endless war, the war funding, the war out of full fund and social programs.
Okay, everybody get that one?
I want to see a network of nodes, physical places that provide common space for community organizing of all kinds.
All right, great. Great.
I want healthcare for everyone. I want the poison for-profit stop. And I believe the full planet.
I agree, I'm very much against habitat destruction and unsustainable and healthy city planning. And I think our financial system is fundamentally flawed. I would like to encourage more local sustainable living systems or alternative currencies or alternative ones to distribute goods and services to us.
I'd like to see public ed
education, return to education for democracy instead of preparing our young the products for industry.
Great. Yeah. Thanks.
I'm more interested in the area of empowerment, to actually, not so much what we're going to do to the corporations, but the people that feel empowered to do it. And the tactics would be having some successes at making some important changes that we can see.
Yeah, good. That's pretty cool.
I would like to see the elimination of private
Financial resources like the Federal Reserve and
and to change us from or get us out of a debt-based society.
okay, yeah, get us out of a debt-based society. Yeah.
I also echo some of the sentiments that education is the most important thing that we do as a society, and we're doing a really poor job of it, so I would like to see more resources. The whole way that we have our financial system set up does not support educating our kids, and in fact, it supports not educating them so that they can go off and fight all of our wars. So I'd really like to see something on a national level around how taxes are handled in this country. And then also, just as Jean says, that just that total goal of empowerment so that people can work on whatever issues that are passionate to them so that they have the skills to be able to do that. So I really want to support that.
Great. Okay. Good. Yeah.
Thinking about this, how to phrase it, preserving democracy in the face of collapse.
Preserving democracy in the face of collapse. Yeah, that's a good goal. Read that one. That might develop all of your goals in some way. All right. Well, I mean, part of the way that we're going to be able to achieve all of those goals, or any of them, is through mobilizing people around these social causes. And, you know, like I mentioned before, this term agency, you know, the capacity for human beings to make choices and to impose those choices on the world will kind of become a theme. And so, you know, the next thing we want to talk about is framing. Framing has an incredible role in community organizing, and the framing of social problems affects community action. So when we talk about, you know, what type of social problems have you all seen in your community, and we can list those problems. And actually, why don't we do that? There were a few kind of, why don't we just, I'll list what we can fit in this middle category of some of the social problems that, you know, that you guys just listed off as goals. So, let's see.
Enforcement, poisoning.
We call that like toxic pollution, maybe, as like a broad term. It will cover pesticides and air pollution and all sorts of things like that. And then read what you were
Well, I was
on the bank.
talking about the bank and how I want to see 2 years in jail. That's really because of the restriction that was focusing on. The whole thing is just fraudulent. Illegal activities, social issues behind that. That seems like they're creating poverty.
So why don't we start poverty, because that will cover, you know, a few different people. And then we have lack of education as a broad category. We had environmental devastation or destruction. What other bigger themes do people classify?
Wealth distribution,
Oh, yeah.
endless war.
Oh, yeah. Wealth distribution. Lack of health care. And put endless war in there. Militarism.
Banking crisis, foreclosures.
Do you think that foreclosures and the banking crisis fit under the term of poverty, or should we have separate categories?
Corporate abuse.
How about, dignity and respect, and stop treating me like a consumer?
Corporate greed and how consumerism.
Right now, I feel like every business person, from the bankers to people that sell toilet paper, are out to get us. I mean, it's like we are being placed for suckers, no respect for our privacy. I don't like what's happened to our country.
Okay.
Globalization.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so let's leave with this list, because what I want to do is go through that list and think about what are the various ways that we can interpret these problems. Like, for instance, with corporate greed, we could say, oh, well, that's capitalism, it's the market, or supply and demand, or, get what you can afford, or what you're educated for. There's all different ways that you can interpret these things. There's two sides to every coin. So with toxic pollution, most of us in this room at least would probably view this as, a threat to health and corporations profiting over, environmental or personal health. But what's the other side going to say? Those people that are, polluting, what's their rationale for what they do? Jobs is always going to be on the table.
Freedom.
Yeah, it's a free capitalist society, right?
They're providing a service that we need, like they're saying people need energy, so.
Right. Yeah, you need Roundup for your weed, so we need Monsanto, right? Okay, good. What about with poverty? What would be the two sides of that issue?
Well, there's always going to be poverty. Can't do anything about that.
Right? Yeah.
People just think that choice.
Right?
That's the big one that's being pushed right now in the media, is that if you don't have a job, you just must be lazy.
Yeah, that's right. How about,
Offshoring of jobs,
say again?
offshoring of jobs.
Right, yes. And how about, the problems with our education system, the lack of education? Obviously, as we heard, most people in this room, believe that education has really taken a back seat and that students are being geared toward being manufacturing minions instead of critical thinkers, right? But what's the education system saying about the way they are producing students out of the system?
You gotta have the technology. If you don't have the technology, you won't have the economy, so leave us alone. We're doing what needs to be done.
Okay, yeah, or...
Then you have people like Rick Santorum who say that if you want to go to college, you must be some kind of snob.
Right. The
whole dumbing down of America.
Yeah.
It's good to be stupid.
Right,
You're not college, you gotta be going to the right college.
Yeah.
No child left behind and no child allowed to excel.
Right.
No.
Right.
Or if you want higher education, join the Army for a few years.
Are there any other issues that anybody would like to kind of go through and do both sides of the coin? You kind of get where I'm going here, but are there any that are interesting?
Distribution of wealth.
Okay, so let's do endless war and the distribution of wealth. So, Michael, you want to?
Endless war, real security.
They're keeping us safe.
Right, national security,
Yeah.
right.
Jobs,
In resource-rich areas.
Yeah.
That's just a coincidence.
A word that's not up there, that's very important to the Greek, would be justice. And a lot of those would go under a category of justice. It's what we're doing just.
Well, hopefully there wouldn't be a pro and a con to that issue, right?
The war one also, that we are
we're taking care of the little guys who can't take care of themselves.
Right. That's our response.
Promoting democracy.
I think about it in terms of what are the sources of the problem? Like what sort of like links them?
Corporate trade.
Right. Well, well, how about economic power, for example? Like, well, the 1%, right? Like, what? Anyway, I'm just putting that out there. Because like on the one hand, you have 99% with these are problems, and the 1% is like basically articulating why they're not, right? That's what you hear in the media. That's what you hear all the time. Right?
Yeah, good. Okay, so all of that discussion, all of this sort of the pro and con type of discussion is actually kind of leading us to this discussion about framing. Framing basically refers to the interactive, collective ways that movement actors assign meaning to their activities in the conduct of community organizing. And in other words, this is how grievances are constructed. How we actually put words to the problems that we're trying to face. We try to come up with shared definitions of social problems. We try to come up with descriptive images that indicate why something is problematic and how it is caused in our social settings. And the meanings that we attach to this framing are fluid. They can change throughout time and throughout our social interactions. So the term framing is actually a term borrowed from a guy named Goffman, and it basically is, it enables individuals to locate, perceive, identify, and label occurrences in the world. So that's kind of the definition of it. And frames function to organize our collective experiences. So like when we were just talking about, for instance, the endless war theme. Framing is kind of the 1 minute sentence that Michael can now spit out in a heartbeat because of lifelong work on those issues. Framing functions to guide action, both individually and collectively. And for community organizers, what matters is the manner in which those grievances are interpreted and the generation and diffusion of those interpretations. And by that, basically, I mean, you come up with the framing, then you need to get other people to join you in agreeing to that framing so that other people start using it. Things like the 99% or, I can't even think of other examples, but little sentences that we, Homeland Security, keeping the homeland safe, is another one of those frames that have been developed so that people can regurgitate them quickly and it encapsulates their view. Saying we are the 99% has a lot of loaded information behind it, right? When you say that, there's a whole bunch of stuff that is within that sentence. And when you say it to someone who agrees with you or who knows that frame, you communicated more than just that one sentence of words. And so part of community organizing actually involves altering other people's frames at times. And that's called frame alignment. Everybody intentionally constructs frames in their life. The media, the victims of crime, the government, industry, they all kind of create these frames that provide us with understanding of what constitutes the problem, what it means, and what needs to be done. And so how this frame suggests a number of things. Number one, why the problem exists. Next is who is responsible, who's to blame for the problem. The third one is what solutions are out there, and what solutions will people accept. And then finally, what community actions are appropriate. This will determine your course of action. So if we were to take toxic solutions as an example, why does this problem exist? Profitable. There was a need for it at some point, right?
I'm just concerned about others.
a motivation toward profit over all other goals. Short-term solutions, technology that needs a place to go, right? They develop these fancy chemicals and this technology, and now they have to find some use for it. And that's why we sprayed Agent Orange all over the Oregon coast. We developed this product and we decided we got to use it somehow, so we dumped it on the Oregon coast. So the next thing is, who is responsible for it? Where do you want to direct the blame?
Greedy corporations.
Greedy corporations? What about the consumers that buy it? The agencies that are supposed to regulate it, right? To come up with laws or rules that they're supposed to follow. The agencies that are supposed to enforce it.
Fat cat getting bonuses.
Fat cat getting bonuses, right? And how about what solutions are out there? What solutions are out there that people might accept? Because obviously we could shut down the factory and stop them from producing it, but then you're going to have, potato farmers or, somebody's going to be pissed off.
More jobs in the woods.
Say again?
More jobs in the woods.
More jobs in the woods. So, educating people. What do you mean by that?
So instead of spraying toxic chemicals all over Triangle Lake, we actually did people in the woods getting rid of stuff.
Do hand removal of weeds and things like that. Great. Yes, that's a great example. What else? Somebody else?
Well, I would say educating people.
Educating people
So that they understand the need for this solution.
Yeah.
Prosecuting the offenders and throwing them in jail.
Yes. Prosecuting offenders and throwing them in jail.
People tell us before profit.
People tell us before profit. Yeah.
Learn to live with less.
Learning to live with less. Good. Anybody else? Okay. So, with those things covered, then, what community actions might be appropriate? What are the types of things that a community organization could do to address those three other parts that we just covered?
Educating people through media.
Okay, yes, an education campaign, hoping that maybe you can persuade people to stop buying it or maybe even stop making it. You could shut down the factory in one way or the other. You could, legislative changes that would make the toxics no longer usable, he said. You could convince the workers to strike and not go to work. Sabotage, a tactic that has been successfully used in many movements. Sabotage as a tactic, that certainly would stop them from producing chemicals.
Purely emotional sabotage.
Well, economic sabotage, obviously has been a tactic since time. A boycott. Yeah.
Civil lawsuit.
Civil lawsuit. Yeah.
Drawing attention to the people who are making decisions
Drawing attention to the people who are making the decisions.
at their homes.
At their homes, yes. Okay. We see some of that. Did you say something?
I think the criminal law as well.
Okay, yeah, criminal lawsuits, having people thrown in jail or prosecuted for things, that would be great. Okay, all right, good. Anybody else have anything else there? All right, and so the solution to that problem of toxic pollution, what would you say the solution would be for this? Would it be complete cessation? It would be a complete stoppage of the production of those chemicals? So that would be what we would be shooting for as our goal, to bring about a complete end to the use of toxic chemicals in our community.
You like that?
An attainable goal is the coal train is looking to run through Eugene. I mean, that is something that we have some power to stop.
Yes, yes.
We also have the power to educate more people to understand that it's not just, I think that there's a lot of people out there that think like, oh, it's just a bunch of environmentalists, but when they realize that there's actual real people getting sick then that changes their mind, and the awareness isn't out there, and like that should be part of the campaign, is putting it out there that it's not just the environment. Like, God, I love the environment. I mean, I'm an environmentalist, and I think it's sad that people think that way, but it's true. It's out there. That mindset is out there.
Okay, good.
Well, I've been noticing that the word radical is now being attached to environmentalist. So it's no longer the environmentalist, the radical environmentalist. So there's, you know, just in terms of being prepared for all that pushback.
Yeah. Well, for the last 7 years, I've been dealing with being called eco-terror.
Terror.
I think also educating people that there are other means of dealing with these chemicals with or without harming that we can get around.
Yeah, educating people about alternatives to using these products, kind of going back to the old ways in an essence. Good, good. Okay, good. Yeah, Art?
I'm sure this might be something we want to talk about again, but I'm not totally certain that it's the result of bad people making bad decisions, but that it's something that just inevitable outcome of our economic system. But if you're going out to protesting, I don't think that might be bad. More likely you might have there's some bad guys doing it. Yeah, President Trump.
I agree with you, I do think that the merchant property is
Yeah, good. Okay, so with regard to framing, a couple of kind of terms of art that I want to throw out at you. There are 3 different ways to frame grievances. You know, and grievances are, you know, this list of things. These are our grievances. One of them is called diagnostic framing. What that basically means is targeting. It's where you identify the problem, you attribute blame, or causality, you know, what caused this to happen. So the community organization has a target. And like, for instance, you know, if you're dealing with like drugs, you know, what's the reason people use drugs? You know, are they immoral individuals? You know, what's the answer to it? You know, jails and longer prison sentences? You know, or is it rehabilitation and job creation? You know, so that's kind of diagnostic framing. Then there's a term called prognostic framing, which that's where you suggest possible solutions and remedies. So this oftentimes includes tactics and strategies that are appropriate for that. A lot of times you're using consensus and mobilization with this type of framing. For instance, you know, marriage equality. You know, people were seeking a change in legislation. You know, making gay marriage appropriate. You know, globalization or like corporate globalization. You know, things like, what was the solution there? You know, things like the WTO protests, you know, shutting down Wall Street, things like that. That's kind of prognostic framing. And then the third kind is called motivational framing, where you basically make a call to arms and a rationale for action. You know, we want you to do this, and here's why. You know, we want you to join the 99% because corporations have taken away your rights. You know, that's kind of your call to action. And this is a motivational framing that provides the vocabulary that compels people to act. Sometimes this is called spin. You know, it's supposed to be your exciting rhetoric that's going to get other people mobilized to do what you want them to do. And oftentimes, you know, this is done through slogans and mission statements. And so there are a lot of different ways to get into framing, and I'll probably put a couple of articles up on the website so people can kind of dive into this in a little more detail. It could be an entire class in and of itself. And we're actually going to cover, during the media and outreach session, we're actually having a U of O journalism professor come in to specifically help us with spin and messaging. And so we will revisit this in a lot more greater detail, but I just kind of wanted to give you the broad brush of some of the terms that we should have in our vocabulary arsenal and why those are important. And so with that,
Super quick, what's prognostic?
prognostic. Yeah, I gotta look on my sheet to make sure I say the right thing. So prognostic suggests possible solutions and remedies. Any other questions? Open it up. So, we have about 20 minutes left if my timing is right. So it's about 8 o'clock right now. So my hope was to have discussion and questions, or the other possibility if there's not enough questions or discussion is to start doing some practice in terms of doing framing or discussing different organizational styles, using some of the content that we went over tonight and kind of fleshing it out within the Occupy Eugene context. So I guess first let's do a round of questions. Does anybody have any questions that they want to have reviewed based on the material?
I just want to make sure I get the diagnostic, prognostic, motivational. So those relate to different ways of framing, could be 3 different ways of framing the same problem.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Occupy Wall Street, that frame is prognostic because it's talking about what we're going to do. Diagnostic framing would be the banks are running our government.
Right. Diagnostic is where you identify the problem and give blame to it.
And what would be a motivational version of that?
Motivational, I have examples of all of them to make sure I get it right. Motivation would be, the rich are killing us, we need to take corporate citizenship away, to give an example.
Isn't that like a kind of a diagnostic prognostic?
Motivational framing is supposed to issue a call to arms and a rationale for action. It's basically it gives you vocabulary.
You can make a difference. You can make a difference.
Yeah, yeah.
Is that motivational?
I think motivational is how you talk about the problem. Like you've identified the problem,
Right.
and then you've come up with what a solution is, and then how do you communicate that? How are we going to motivate people to then act on that?
Are those
Did I get that? Yeah. Well, I think you're right, John, that, a single issue can be framed in each of those different ways. Like, I used the example of drugs, because I gave this lecture to a drug policy reform group about a year ago. And so for diagnostic framing, you use drugs, the reason, identifying the problem. The people were immoral individuals. The answer was jails and longer sentences. The reason, the other side of the coin, the reason was medical conditions, addiction, lack of economic opportunities, and in that case the answer was rehab and job training. That was the diagnostic, diagnosing the problem and what the solution or the answer might be. The prognostic part to the drug problem was basically focusing on the answers, the possible solutions. So for drugs, the answer was jail or some kind of consequence of a lack of economic opportunities instead of jail, or dealing with the actual underlying medical problems instead of, blaming the drug user. And then for motivational, it was, join the war on drugs or stop the war on drugs as the motivational statements to get people involved in
Or legalize drugs.
Or, right.
Part of what progressives have done is try to frame things more in terms of information and facts. That's not as successful frame in terms of getting people to act, because people will act against their own best interests if you can appeal to their values and their beliefs of how they perceive themselves.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, that's a great point. So we have to keep that in. Definitely. I think the Tea Party, if you look at some of the Tea Party rhetoric, it's a great example of framing. Acknowledgement starts that way.
Motivational frame would be telling people why that they might want to participate in solutions in terms that they can understand.
Yeah.
This is a call to action.
I mean, I guess my gut understanding of motivational framing is it's supposed to be what motivates you to join the army, so to speak. You know, it motivates you to join the cause, or whatever that might be. Dan, do you have something to add to that?
Well, I think a useful way to think about this is like going to a doctor's office. The doctor's going to diagnose the disease. We have a society that's dying of cancer of corporate greed, right? Prognosis, if you don't do anything, then, you know, we're going to die. Next steps, whatever it might be to, in the cancer framework, you know, if you take the right treatment for radiation treatment, chemotherapy, it might increase your chances of surviving. If you don't, the prognosis is not good. And, you know, motivation would be, well, if you really want to live, you need to take action. Hopefully that will motivate people. So, you know, diagnosis and prognosis really relate to diagnosis, identifying the problem, prognosis, the various alternatives and where they will lead, and then motivation is to try to get steps taken that will move you in one direction.
Great.
Another way to frame the list that you've got here in terms of why are we coming together to talk about developing a strategy for Occupy Eugene. These problems were all there before Occupy Wall Street happened, but what caused Occupy Wall Street to emerge was the outrageous ripoff of $16 trillion or whatever it was that was, even though we've been beaten about the head with all these issues for many years, we didn't really rise up, that finally they took such a huge step that was so outrageous that it couldn't be ignored, and that's when Occupy Wall Street emerged. So these are what was different about Occupy Wall Street is that we didn't have topics. It's just that everybody was so pissed off and came out in the street, they didn't necessarily exactly know why. So to frame on the individual outrages of these elite group, in a way Occupy has gone beyond that. And we're criticizing the whole thing. And the task we have to frame it is to how are we going to create the new picture as opposed to the very important work of attacking each one of these issues. Occupy is also about what's next, what's happening. Like Charles Eisenstein said, the old story is falling apart. We haven't written a new story yet. We're in the space between stories. The story is a frame.
Yeah, and so if we were to look at, you know, the entire Occupy Wall Street picture, instead of looking at these specific things, what would be the diagnosis? You know, what's the diagnosis of the problem with Wall Street?
We should be they did it.
Okay. So, so the diagnosis would be
economic inequality.
So then the prognosis, you know, what was the prognosis?
New story.
Well, so the prognosis is if we do this, this will happen, and if we do that, this, you know, if we do nothing, we will continue to be raped and pillaged by corporations. The economic gap will increase, and social services will flounder even more, and we'll be screwed. And then the other side of the coin is, you know, if we mobilize and take our power and do what we should do, then we might be able to put some checks and balances back into this equation. I'm sure people could probably put better rhetoric together than that. But and so then, what would be the motivation for working on that problem?
The 99% got rise up.
Yeah, right. Then we're tired of being screwed, right? If we don't stand up for ourselves, certainly no one else is going to.
Another world is possible.
Excellent. Yeah, good.
We need to take our country back.
So that would be, you know, the three different kinds of framing for, you know, the larger, the whole enchilada, so to speak. And then, and then let's just assume that, like, each of those things were campaigns that we just, you know, obviously this is too many for Occupy Eugene, but, you know, let's say the top three on this list were the three that we decided we were going to work toward on goals. we would do that same framing exercise, for each of those campaigns. What's the diagnosis, what's the prognosis, and what's the motivation for getting people mobilized around it. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. What else? Anybody else have any discussions? Yeah, Tom?
Well, okay, so if there's different ways to frame the same campaign, at what stages do you use one sort of framing and what stages do you use a different one? Or is that a topic for a different class?
Your framing depends on your audience. A lot of, what type of frame you use definitely depends on the group of people you're speaking to, but I think, Sam, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that generally you're going to use all three forms of framing in a given campaign.
You may frame it differently, as you were mentioning, for different audiences. Like the bank campaign, you may frame some stuff for the clients. You may frame some stuff for the legislators that are buying. You may frame some stuff for the board members. It depends on whose behavior you're trying to change, and you might use all three techniques in that.
Yes, you really have to understand who is your target audience, and that has to be adapted constantly. You can't give the same messaging to really any single group of people usually.
Seems it also depended, like you were saying, on the situation, but the stage of the campaign that you're in. Like at the beginning, you might want to focus more on targeting, just to stir up the sense of the resentment of the community, to get people passionate, so they're actually going to be willing to do something. Then you go to motivational framing and say, yes, you can do it, and then go to prognostic and be like, well, here's the solution. I'm sure that these kind of work in staggered patterns.
Great. So sometimes motivation comes first.
Yeah, that's good what you're saying.
It's going to be hands-on working. I'm actually trying to come up with these goals, and it's going to be a lot more of you guys doing the talking and the working than, today was just supposed to be kind of getting a bunch of terms out that you'll be using. You're basically taking this first step in trying to come up with the concrete goals and plans for Occupy Eugene in the next 6 months or so.